Under normal circumstances, a property like Star Wars should be a gift that keeps on giving. More specifically, it should keep on giving a never-ending stream of merchandising revenue. Clearly, that is not happening anymore. But instead, the very people who poisoned the well that used to produce that revenue stream keep on giving these little insights into what went through their heads as they did. So I guess that's something. This time, Rian Johnson shared his mindset going into The Last Jedi. In so doing, he also revealed why he under no circumstance should have been tasked with making a Star Wars movie in the first place. In this editorial, I shall break down why, and while we're at it, give you my own verdict of his follow-up movie, Knives Out. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, where his original movie, Knives Out, was the topic of discussion, Rian Johnson was asked,
whenever you're writing, let's say you're creating your own universe, you said you don't think about actors, you're starting kind of something from scratch. How is that approach versus something where you have a pre-existing universe? Like, if you're writing characters for Star Wars, you have this universe, you have characters that everybody knows, and then now you are doing something from scratch. Like, do you find your approach is different for that?
No, not at all. Because I don't really think in terms of universes, like or in terms of creating worlds or whatever. That's not that interesting to me. The only thing that's interested in me is story, and the story specific to, like, whether you're writing a Star Wars film or that's part of a 3-movie trilogy or quote unquote original thing like Knives Out, you're still telling a story that's new to the thing that you're doing, that it has to work within the context of that movie. So to me, the notion of what's the entire galaxy or world that you're creating or something, I can't imagine getting excited about creating that. To me, what I'm excited about is creating a 2-hour-long experience for an audience to have in the theater. And that means how they engage moment to moment with the story and the characters that are on the screen. And that doesn't change in either one of those.
Disregarding the word salad of it all, at first glance, the basic content of this comment is fine. Whether part of a trilogy or an interconnected cinematic universe like the MCU, every single movie in it has to work independently and tell its own captivating story in the allotted 2 or so hour time span. To use some MCU examples, Guardians of the Galaxy did that and is loved for it. By contrast, in Iron Man 2, the story was secondary to setting up the universe, and because of that, Iron Man 2 is, how shall I put it politely, nobody's favorite. We'll go with that. That dumpster fire is nobody's favorite. But there is another side to it. Continuing with the MCU, one of the reasons it is the gold standard where cinematic universes are concerned is because Kevin Feige understands that while every single movie in it must work standalone, he learned that lesson from Iron Man 2. They must also fit within the larger tapestry and narrative. What that means is that each director has freedom to tell the story they want, but within the boundaries of what fits the overall universe. When dealing with a larger interconnected story, this is how it must be. There is no other way. Even trying a different way where the director has greater freedom has always and without exception ended in disaster. There have been directors developing movies for the MCU that wanted such creative freedom that their movies would not have fit within the larger tapestry, the most famous example being Edgar Wright's Ant-Man. He never got to make that Ant-Man movie, and that was the right call. In order to create a cohesive and interconnected MCU, some Edgar Wright's Ant-Man will have to be sacrificed along the way. This was the way the original Star Wars trilogy was made as well. George Lucas only directed the original Star Wars. Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi were directed by Irvin Kershner and Richard Marquand, and they were not free to make the movies they wanted. Of course, they were hired to make the best movies they possibly could, but their freedom to do so was limited to what fit the overall vision, for they were playing within someone else's sandbox. Lucas thrived as the producer ultimately in charge when working with directors like Kirshner and Marquand, who again were willing to work within the confines of that sandbox. When it came to the prequels though, he reportedly asked his friends Steven Spielberg and Ron Howard, both quite accomplished directors in their own right, and both of whom Lucas had worked with before, if they were keen to direct the prequels for him. Spielberg, of course, directed the Indiana Jones movies that George Lucas produced, but they were always joint ventures, where they were equal partners. On Star Wars, it would not be so. There, Lucas would be firmly in charge. Ron Howard worked with Lucas on Willow, where they reportedly clashed on set, although it did not affect their friendship much. They didn't work together again though. Howard famously picked up the pieces on Solo, but Lucas wasn't there to micromanage like he reportedly did on Willow, and which he no doubt would have done had Howard accepted directing a prequel. As we all know, Lucas directed the prequels himself, as both Spielberg and Howard were like, thanks, but we're good. Probably because being visionary directors themselves, they couldn't restrict themselves to working within the confines of Lucas' sandbox. And that's fair. They did the right thing in declining. That's what Rian Johnson should have done. Lucas still should have found a Kirshner or a Marquand for the prequel trilogy though, someone he could control, but who could have helped him make those movies better. Although that's neither here nor there. Disney Star Wars movies needed to be made the Marvel way. By that I mean they needed to be producer-driven, not director-driven, as only a producer can maintain consistency of vision across multiple movies directed by multiple directors, all with different directorial styles and sensibilities. This was, if anything, extra important because George Lucas wasn't there to oversee proceedings. In his absence, an absence Disney by the way wanted, someone else needed to step into the role he otherwise would have filled. Someone else needed to do for Star Wars what Kevin Feige did for Marvel and the MCU. That someone else should by rights have been Kathleen Kennedy. I don't know if she wasn't up for the job, or if she didn't understand that Star Wars must be producer-driven, but the end result remains the same. She gave too much freedom early on, only to have to rein things back in, time and time again. The one exception to this was Rian Johnson and The Last Jedi. Kathleen Kennedy gave him the freedom to tell the story he wanted in his movie, even if that wrought havoc with everything that would come later. Kathleen Kennedy let Rian Johnson put the ideology the two had in common front and center in the movie, and she let Rian Johnson, for all intents and purposes, close off nearly all story threads set up in The Force Awakens, leaving the story nowhere to go next. This was further compounded by Rian Johnson ending the movie with Luke Skywalker being dead and General Leia being alive and poised for a big part in whatever came next, despite Carrie Fisher dying a year before the movie was released. This is where any other producer worth their salt would have demanded reshoots to help out the next installment. Reshoots which could have allowed Leia to die gracefully before her utterly insane Mary Poppins moment, and have Luke live to be redeemed another day. Rian Johnson, of course, didn't care. He had told the story that interested him and couldn't give a damn about what happened next. While Kathleen Kennedy evidently wasn't strong enough a producer to do what was required. As a result, together they destroyed Star Wars. There is a place for directors like Rian Johnson. Yeah, I know what you're thinking, but that's not what I meant. That place is making their own original movies where they are free to make the rules themselves. Movies like Knives Out. I only saw that recently, and while I do like a good Agatha Christie-style whodunit, I didn't enjoy this one bit. The political aspect of it that the reviewers loved really rubbed me the wrong way, and it was just tonally off. Weird movie. But while I didn't enjoy it, others did, so whatever floats your boat. Point is, we need original movies too. Actually, we need original movies more. Some directors, like Rian Johnson, has seemingly little respect for pre-existing properties where the vision to be preserved is at the core someone else's. That is fine, but that should immediately disqualify such directors from consideration for something like Star Wars. Let them do what they do best instead. This interview only goes to show that Rian Johnson still isn't the guy for Star Wars, so his trilogy that's not happening isn't really a loss to anyone. He should never have been hired for Star Wars in the first place. That he was, and everything that happened since, is on Kathleen Kennedy. As such, this interview serves as a reminder of what Doctor Who proved so recently. No institution is so great that the wrong people in charge of it can't utterly destroy it. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.